Hello, everyone, and welcome to Food Tank's exclusive webinar series. Sorry for the delay in getting started. This is Sarah Small, Food Tank Global Events Director and Special Assistant to the President. I'm really excited about today's webinar with Eric Munoz, Evan Hanczor, and Emily Luchetti. It's an honor to have all of you here. And just to give you some background information on our three speakers, Eric is a Senior Policy Advisor with Oxfam America. He has more than a decade of experience working on hunger and human rights policy issues, having previously worked as a Senior Policy Advisor for Bread with the World and as a paralegal with the Lawyers Committee for the Civil Rights Under Law. Evan, once he realized his love for cooking, trained with Chef Michael Nishan. He has worked at Locanda Verde, Brooklyn's Egg, and Parish Hall. Evan also earned a 2013 StarsChef.com Rising Star Sustainability Award. And Emily, as a chef and author, has helped to define what great pastry in America means. She was the pastry chef at Stars for 8 years and has also co-owned the retail bakery Star Bake. She now joins Big Night Restaurant Group. Today, our speakers will present information about international food aid, what's wrong with it, and why it needs reform. This webinar will be recorded and posted on foodtank.com afterwards. You can also follow along and participate on Twitter using hashtag #FoodTank. And please submit your questions using the questions tab in your control panel. So without further ado, Emily, Evan, and Eric, our three E's this afternoon. It's wonderful to have you here, and I'm excited to hear your presentation. I'll give you the floor now.
Great, thank you very much. Nice to be with you all this afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. And great to be joined by Evan and Emily. My name is Eric Munoz, and I'm a policy advisor with Oxfam America, based here in Washington, D.C. Oxfam is a global advocacy organization seeking to right the wrongs of hunger and poverty and injustice. And in addition to being an advocacy organization, we are also a humanitarian relief and development organization. So we bring experience globally to this issue of reforming food aid, and it's from that perspective that we want to discuss this critical issue and why it's ripe for reform. But I thought as a way of introduction, it would be far more interesting for you to hear from my two colleagues who have been in the trenches with me on this fight and who bring unique and important insights and perspectives and who are also, in their own rights, not just fabulous and fantastic chefs, but also real advocates and seek to link their own experience as chefs and as people who understand food and agriculture at a very basic, very visceral level, bring that experience to the policy debates here in Washington, and seek to link them, right? Link their passion for food with their passion for social justice. So what I thought we'd do today, before I get into the meat of the discussion around this issue, I wanted to give the floor first to Emily and then to Evan to share their own thoughts, both on why this issue matters, why they are social justice advocates, why they came to this issue, and also a little bit about how they have been engaged with Oxfam America and on this issue of food aid reform. So let me first invite, if I can, Emily to give us a few words about her own passion for this issue and experience. So Emily, if I can invite you. Great.
Hi, everybody. This is Emily. You know, I've been a chef for 25 years, and you know, when we're a chef and we're cooking for people, we're nourishing people and we're taking care of them. And we do that in a very farm-to-table way, and we're very fortunate to be able to have food at our fingertips that we can, you know, seasonally, you can't reach for them out of season, but that we can really take and give to our people and make their lives better in our restaurants and wherever we are. And so this farm to table thing is something that I don't think that I took for granted, because I always appreciated. But then with this whole food aid thing, I kind of took a step back and said, gosh, there are a lot of people that just don't have that opportunity. And you know, yes, there are a lot of people in the United States that don't have food and everything like that, and you sometimes will say to yourself, well, how can I save the world? But the thing that's really important about the food aid is that, you know, as we deal with farm to table, the whole farm to the whole food aid thing is farm to shipping to table, and we really have to try to get the shipping component as minimized as possible. Obviously, when you're talking about feeding people in a famine, across halfway across the globe, there's going to be shipping involved, but we really need to neutralize it, and if we can eliminate it, there's so many more people that we could feed by doing very, very little. And I think that's the most important thing, is taking the inefficiencies out of this bill, because we can serve millions and millions of more people. And as a chef, I just kind of find it my personal responsibility to really give as many people an opportunity to eat food. I mean, it sounds so simple and so basic, but it's something that I feel very, very strongly about, and I feel a responsibility towards. And I think we as Americans don't have to do that much to make it so much more possible.
Thanks a lot, Emily. That's great. And we'll have time to ask questions at the end of the session. And certainly Evan and Emily both will be available to take any questions as well. So Evan, do you want to jump in and say a few words now as well?
Yeah, definitely. Hello, everyone. My name is Evan Hanczor. I'm the chef at Egg Restaurant in Brooklyn, New York. Just to give kind of a little perspective on how I got involved in food policy, as Sarah mentioned, I did work at the Dressing Room restaurant up in Westport with Michelle Nishan, who many of you, I'm sure, know as a real leader in sustainable food and food access and food justice, both through his restaurant work and also through his Wholesome Wave Foundation. And it was there that I think I began to catch the bug for seeing how important a tool food was for social justice, and how misused it often is, unfortunately. So at Egg, we, as Emily mentioned, very similar approach to our food. We are very community-based, very focused on local farmers, local agriculture, achieving sustainability in as many ways as possible in the restaurant. And Emily and I actually both attended a James Beard Foundation boot camp for chefs to learn about advocacy, food advocacy, and how to harness kind of the relatively new sort of celebrity or reach of the chef role in the food discussion. And it was there that we met with Oxfam. We met Will Fenton there, who's connected us with Eric, and helped to organize our trip down to DC a couple months ago. And I've worked with Oxfam since then a couple times. I was a spokesperson for them at the People's Climate March in New York City, which was an excellent experience. And I think one of the great things about Oxfam and working with them has been the opportunity they present to take some of my interests and sort of skills and passions in food, which on a day-to-day basis are kind of tied to the local and the small scale and the community, and apply the philosophy that I have around those things in the same way to more global food issues. And such is the case with the food aid reform issue that we're talking about today, that Eric will fill you in on very comprehensively, as he has kind of informed all of us who participated in the lobby reform last month or 2 months ago. But when I was first when we first sort of approached this issue, finding the connection to a global issue I always try to bring it back to something that I can relate to locally. And as Emily mentioned, this idea of direct supply, empowering people to be in control of their food supply as much as possible, kind of cutting out the middlemen, reducing inefficiencies, feeding as many people as efficiently and as sustainably as possible are all things that I can connect with on a local level, and all issues that creep up in the current state of U.S. food aid, which, while successful in a lot of ways, is still quite a bit more inefficient than it needs to be. So Emily and I and several other chefs went down to D.C. In February, and we met with our respective members of Congress. We had some lobby training with Eric and the Oxfam team, and had several office meetings throughout the day with congressional members and or their staffers, and we're able to discuss the Food for Peace Reform Act, which is currently been introduced into the Senate. And for those members not in the Senate, for the House members, to discuss general support of food aid reform if and when we hope a similar bill makes its way into the House. We also had an opportunity to meet with Senators Corker and Coons, who are who introduced the bill, the co-sponsors of the bill, and hear from people who really know this issue inside and out why it's important to them personally, and why it's an important national issue for us to tackle, one that might not come immediately to mind as one of the issues in food that chefs or even people interested in this sort of good food movement might think of, but one that's important for us all to get behind. So I think that's pretty much my rundown of my involvement in this.
Great. Thanks a lot for that. So let's dive in and talk a little bit about the specifics of this issue and why it matters and why Oxfam is in this fight. So what I'm going to do with this presentation is to give you a little bit of background information about the programs currently under U.S. law, the problems, and the policy fixes that we see are important. And of course, we won't let you go without giving you ways to get engaged and to take action. So with that, let's jump in. Why is food aid necessary? Well, food aid is essentially designed to deliver emergency and development assistance to people suffering from food insecurity and hunger. And around the world, we face massive needs. So 57.5 million people receive some sort of humanitarian assistance. These are people caught in man-made or natural disasters who desperately need support. And food, among other things like shelter, water, sanitation services, protection, food is one of the critical needs. And although we, as a global community, make a massive effort to reach people in places like Syria, South Sudan, in the Philippines last year with the typhoon, there is still a gap between what is necessary. 77.9 million people needed aid or expected to need aid this year. Only 57.5 million people will receive it. So humanitarian assistance is a critical need, and it's a critical role for food aid. And chronic hunger as well. 1 in 9 people around the world suffer from hunger. They don't get enough food to eat, either now or they won't at some point in the year. And the problem, of course, is most severe in sub-Saharan Africa, but you can see that globally, this is not a problem that's concentrated in one geographic region or one continent. Latin America and Asia certainly have large shares of people living in hunger as well. And food aid is designed to meet their needs as well. So what does the U.S. do? Well, last year, or 2013, I should say, the U.S. provided 1.36 million tons of food aid. So we, as I'll explain in more detail later, we purchased food from the United States and we shipped it to destinations around the world. The U.S. is the most generous donor of food aid. We reached 46.2 million people in 2013 in 56 countries. So we are making a massive effort as a very generous donor to try to address the problem of hunger, whether that is in response to emergency situations or to address chronic hunger, as I demonstrated in the previous slide. So how does food aid work? It's a long process, right? This is what we know. Basically, food is purchased from the United States. It's purchased from grain traders with silos in the Midwest. It's then transported on barges or on trains to coastal ports, where it's loaded onto cargo vessels. As I'll explain in more detail in just a minute, most of those vessels, or at least half of those vessels, have to be registered in the United States. So U.S. flagged vessels are called, which is one key issue of concern for us. Once they get loaded onto those vessels in ports like New Orleans or Galveston Houston in Texas and the Gulf. They are sent to ports around the world where they're offloaded. And often the final destination is some inland country. So, for example, you might need to address an emergency in the Central African Republic, and the closest port might be in Nigeria or in Ghana. So you'll do the offloading at that port, and then it'll be put on trucks and transported to its final destination. Once it reaches its final destination, it basically is dealt with in one of two ways. Either it is directly distributed to beneficiaries, or in some instances, U.S. food aid is sold on local markets. So we buy the food from the United States, ship it to the destinations around the world, and then sell it in developing countries. And the reason for that is because we want to be able to, we as the U.S., I say, want to be able to use those proceeds from the sale of that food aid product to fund development activities. So, for example, if you've got a maternal and child health program, you may need to do weighing, you may need to do vaccinations, you may need to do nutrition counseling for pregnant women, and you can't do that with food. Food is not the commodity or the source of the funding that makes that possible. Cash is, of course, to pay the workers to do all of these things, to pay for the vaccines. So monetization, as it's called, the sale of food aid on local markets, is used to generate proceeds, which are then used to fund development activities. So just a word here on why we have the system that we have, as I've described it. Multiple laws govern food aid, and a couple of different federal agencies currently administer the program. And the program was started in the 1950s and is implemented or is authorized through the Farm Bill. So there you can see that there's a very intimate connection between U.S. farm policy and our food aid program. And the origins of the program really had to do as much with rebuilding Europe after World War II. This is kind of the trial run for the current food aid program, because we were sending food to Europe, and then we decided to make it a permanent program and enshrine it into law. It has as much to do with meeting that humanitarian need as it does with, or it did at the time, with supporting domestic farmers. So the U.S. used to sit on mountains of grain because of our agriculture policy, and trying to figure out what to do with that grain, we determined that the appropriate response was to send it to people in need around the world. Of course, the current set of farm programs that we have is quite a bit different than that, and yet we have a policy that hasn't continued to evolve even as our farm programs have. But what this all means is that there's a strict U.S. requirement for food aid. There's also the agriculture cargo preference requirement. As I mentioned, half of food aid has to be shipped on U.S. flag vessels. And the reason for this was tied to ensuring that there is a domestic flagged fleet in times of emergencies, so that the military could utilize that sea lift capacity to deliver goods or people around the world when necessary. So there's a very specific national security component to the agriculture cargo preference requirement, and that is also tied to our food aid program. So you begin to see how there are these different components coming together to support what has been the status quo for the last 50 years. The third leg of that are aid organizations, because USAID and the World Food Program, which are in the case I'm describing here, are the two main donors or deliverers of aid. But at that last mile, the entity between the time that the food aid gets to its location and the time that it actually reaches the beneficiary, aid organizations have groups like Relief Services or even Oxfam play a role in delivering that assistance. And traditionally, because it has served, these programs, particularly in the United States, have served as a source of funding for development programs, aid organizations have supported the programs quite substantially and called for their continuation despite what we recognize are problems. Now, I will make one caveat and say that that the Oxfam America does not take U.S. government assistance. So while we recognize the importance of food aid that as a critical resource, we're not directly involved in any U.S. food aid programs. But these three different interests, as I've described them, represent what has been called the iron triangle, and three sides that have kept the program as it is, despite some of the concerns that have been raised about it. So what are those concerns? Let me turn to that now. So if we look at the chain from purchase in the United States to transport to final destination, we recognize that there are a number of challenges or problems. First, food aid bought in the United States and shipped to its final destination takes, on average, 147 days from time of purchase to time of final distribution. And obviously, if you're dealing with a situation like Typhoon Yolanda in the Philippines, waiting 147 days for food to arrive isn't going to meet the needs of the people who are affected by the crisis. So that's just an unacceptable problem we have when we buy food in the United States and ship it around the world. Also, the combination of the fact that you have a U.S. flag vessel requirement and you have a requirement that all food aid must be purchased in the United States means that more than half of food aid goes to shipping and overhead rather than paying for food. So 42 cents on the dollar pays for the actual commodity, 58 cents on the dollar pays for all of the necessary and unnecessary requirements to get food from point A to point B. And as I note here at this last bullet point, the U.S. flag vessel requirement has been estimated to cost approximately $50 million annually. Now, that I think is a conservative estimate. I think it's probably higher than that, but that's the information we have. And one of the challenges is getting good information because the U.S. flag requirement in general is a bit opaque. And so it's difficult to understand exactly how much that's costing U.S. taxpayers, but we know that it is in excess of what would be the cost if all food aid were competitively bid on the cheapest flag vessel. So a couple of additional problems and concerns that we've raised. One is that when food from the United States is shipped to beneficiaries, it's not always of the quality, the type, or the particular commodity that is locally consumed. And even if the beneficiary is in desperate need of food aid, certainly it's not ideal to give them a commodity that they're not familiar with. For example, shipping wheat to Malawi, where they are a typical maize-consuming, or maize is the staple for consumption. Do they know how to cook wheat? Do they prefer wheat, etc.? Those are certainly challenges that we're concerned about. But more fundamentally, the shipment of U.S. food aid to destinations around the world may not fully appreciate the real context or the drivers of food insecurity in given communities. If the problem is not food availability, but rather people's ability to pay for food, then we might be undermining local markets and local farmers when we are shipping that food over, because that food that we're providing is competing with locally produced food. So at its worst, U.S. food aid can undermine local markets and local farmers. And we've documented, certainly the U.S. has documented instances where that concern has arisen. To go back to the Malawi example in 2004 and 2005, when they required external assistance for a massive drought that they were facing, the food arrived so late that there were real concerns that it was going to compete with the next harvest for the local population, and that was certainly a reason for serious concern. Turning to the issue of monetization, I'll highlight one additional point, which is that when you buy food from the United States and ship it to a destination around the world, sell it on a local market, you're very unlikely to recoup the full cost that you paid for the food at the outset. And that means that you're losing money in this process. So the Government Accountability Office, the watchdog agency for the U.S. government, estimates that you lose between 2007 and 2009, $73 million was lost annually out of the food aid program simply from the process of monetization. So they bought it for $1 and they were only able to sell it on a local market for 73 cents. And certainly that's a massive waste, an unnecessary waste that arises from the process of monetization. So what reforms are needed? What do we want to see happen? What kinds of changes are we advocating for? First, we want to provide greater flexibility in how food aid is delivered. We know that the current process of buying from U.S. and shipping on U.S. flag vessels is both more costly and less timely than alternatives. For example, if you have a food crisis, again to use Malawi as an example, if there is a food crisis in Malawi, is there food available, for example, in South Africa that could be purchased and distributed to people in need in Malawi? That kind of regional purchase, it makes absolute sense, can be cost-effective, can support local economies and local markets, and can avoid some of the problems and some of the inefficiencies that we were identifying earlier when we're talking about the by U.S. provisions of current food aid law. And we're seeing lots and lots of local and regional procurement happen. World Food Program has its Purchase for Progress program, which they have piloted over, I think it was a 5-year period, and they just released the evaluation report for that, which is rich in detail about both the promise of this practice, but also some of the challenges with it. But generally, when local and regional procurement happens, you can save substantial sums of money because you're cutting out some of the unnecessary shipping, for example, and you can also potentially save on the actual cost of the commodity. So when analysis of a pilot program in the United States was done, pilot program on local and regional procurement was completed, the finding was that for basic commodities, rice, grains, rice, wheat, other grains, cost savings of up to 50% could be achieved. And in addition, you can support these kinds of programs, as I mentioned earlier, can support local farmers rather than undermining them. Distribution of cash and vouchers are also ways of supporting local markets while getting food into the hands of those who need it. In addition to providing greater flexibility, we also need to address the shipping regulations, including the U.S. Flag vessel requirement that creates several, a number of inefficiencies and cost U.S. taxpayers money. And we want to end the practice of monetization. So selling aid on local markets to generate cash is a bad practice. It's universally, I think, recognized as a bad practice. I think it's very hard to defend. And it doesn't make sense for an aid organization who wants to run a really important food security, nutrition, or health program, but is struggling to figure out the best means of paying for it. So ending monetization is not about eliminating those programs or those projects. It's really about finding the most efficient way of paying for those projects and using that resource to achieve that objective. So as I said, what we're trying to do with these reforms is to move away from a one-size-fits-all approach, more flexibility, so more ability to do local and regional procurement, more ability to do voucher or cash distribution, and recognizing that there will still be some instances in which traditional food aid delivery, as I was describing it earlier, buying food from the United States and shipping it to points around the world, will make sense both in terms of the time and the cost and the appropriateness of the intervention given the context and the situation. So if it's a food crisis where local food is not available, where markets are not functioning, and we have witnessed these even in recent years, then of course bringing food from the outside can make sense. And aid organizations and USAID, as the lead implementing agency for the US government for food aid programs, know how to do that context analysis. Unfortunately, under current law, they are not always given the flexibility they need in order to carry forward the smart kinds of programs that they could, given traditional food aid programs. So this is what we're fighting for. So how will reform happen? First, Oxfam has been working on this issue for at least 10 years, if not longer, through multiple farm bills, and also in the context of trade negotiations before the WTO. And so we recognize that there's not a single path forward on reform. So, for example, changing the Food for Peace Act in the Farm Bill, which is up for reauthorization every 5 years, is one strategy to affect reform. And in fact, in the last Farm Bill, which was passed negotiated in 2013 but passed in early 2014, we did see some modest reforms. So the agriculture committees in both the House and the Senate recognized that current food aid programs needed to be reformed, and they offered some modest changes. For example, they made some regulatory reforms to try to address monetization, and USAID is using it to their advantage to try to reduce monetization as much as they can. They have also implemented a small local and regional procurement program, but that is in addition to the existing program. So rather than change the existing program, they simply added on another component that would allow for local and regional procurement. However, given the size of the program, roughly $1.5 billion annually, the local and regional procurement program that's authorized in the Farm Bill is quite small. It's only authorized up to $80 million. So you see that the U.S., the Congress, continues to push for U.S. Sourcing as the main vehicle or pathway for food aid. They haven't opened up the program substantially. In addition, the Obama administration in recent years has made efforts to promote food aid reform through the budget, so through the appropriations process. They have offered on several occasions their proposals for reform. And we have seen, again, modest efforts by the Appropriations Committee in Congress to incorporate those reforms into the appropriations bills. So some changes have been made. But ultimately, this sort of piecemeal approach is not getting us to the kind of ambitious reform that we need. We do have, though, some real champions in Congress who are pushing for very robust, very comprehensive reform. As Evan mentioned, the Food for Peace Reform Act of 2015 was introduced last month or in February by Senators Corker and Senator Coons, and is a real effort to overhaul the way the U.S. food aid program works, to deal with the issue of monetization, to deal with the issue of the lack of flexibility in current food aid programs, and to deal with the U.S. cargo preference requirement. And dealing with those inefficiencies, they estimate, can help U.S. food aid programs reach 12 million more people without actually increasing the budget at all. So this is just dealing with the inefficiencies in the current program and dramatically increasing the reach of the program. And I think there's no better argument for fiscal conservatives and everyone who's interested in a smart, effective government than we can do better without actually increasing the budget for these programs at all. So what is Oxfam doing? Evan mentioned, and Emily also talked about their own activism in this space. If you go to oxfamamerica.org/foodaid, you can find resources about our actions on this issue. And one step that you can take today is to sign the petition. So you can go to the website and sign the petition that is asking members of the Senate to co-sponsor the Corker-Coons Food for Peace Reform Act of 2015. And of course, we want to see lots of co-sponsors on that bill to show a real demonstration that that there is an appetite and an energy for reform in the Senate. And while we push on the Senate to take action, and we expect that they will this summer, we're also working with members of the House. Representative Royce and Representative Engel from California and New York, respectively, have already been champions of food aid reform during the Farm Bill debate, and we continue to work with them and expect that they will introduce legislation this year, perhaps mirroring what is being done in the Senate, perhaps taking a slightly different approach, but ultimately having a reform effort in both the House and the Senate, and having the administration push for reform, demonstrate that this is one of the few issues in Congress right now, or in government right now, where you can get real strong bipartisan support to make change happen. So we're excited. We think that this is a key moment, and we are hopeful that you will take this message, you will take action, and you will work with your networks and your communities to also push reform forward. And if you stay engaged both with Food Tank and with Oxfam, we will be sure to let you know what is going on and keep you apprised, and also give you the opportunity to continue to engage. So with that, I think we can go ahead and open it up for questions, both from Sarah as well as from others on the phone, I believe.
Great. Thank you, Eric, Evan, and Emily. That was a really informative presentation and great slides as well. We do have some questions from our listeners, but I'll try to stick to our time as well. So we'll wrap up within the next 10 minutes or so. And if listeners have any additional questions, please do continue to send them in. We can always send them to our speakers afterwards. But I'd like to start with this question from one of our listeners. And he writes, U.S. food aid programming operates through several channels, example USAID, USDA, FFP, etc. To what extent are these different avenues of food aid adopting new aid modalities like cash and vouchers and local purchase? Is the use of these new modes of food assistance particularly identified with the work of some food aid channels than others?
Yeah, it's a great question. So USAID is the main implementing organization for food aid. USDA operates food aid programs, although on a slightly smaller basis in terms of the overall budget size. And they have made, both agencies have made every effort to take advantage of flexibilities they are offered under current law, recognizing that the majority of food aid is still tied to U.S. purchase. So, for example, through one of the budget measures that the administration has taken, they have allocated a certain portion of what is called the International Disaster Assistance Account, which is the blanket account for dealing with all emergency assistance for all crises around the world. They've allocated a portion of that for local and regional procurement. The challenge here, of course, is that there are many needs in a man-made or natural disaster, and so allocating, there's a balance to be struck between allocating resources for local and regional procurement through the International Disaster Assistance Account and meeting other types of humanitarian needs, so whether that's shelter or water and sanitation, etc. USDA, for its part, is looking at how to implement local and regional procurement, particularly for school feeding programs. So these are our noontime meals, for example, for children in school, and they're trying to create systems in the countries where they operate to allow for more local and regional procurement for school meals. So there are efforts to try to take advantage of greater flexibility, but recognize that ultimately those are in part decisions that are being made by the current administration that could be changed by the next administration unless we get reform of the underlying laws in the Food for Peace Act.
Great, thank you, Eric. The next question comes from a listener, and I think Emily mentioned this in the beginning. How can the farm to shipping to table supply chain be more streamlined or more efficient? What would it take?
Well, it's context specific, of course, but it means doing the context analysis and then figuring out what the most efficient means of getting assistance to people in need will be. So in the case of Typhoon Yolanda, for example, the U.S. was sending high-energy biscuits on planes within 48 hours of the typhoon's landing in the Philippines. They then switched to a cash program, a voucher program, where they were providing WFP with funding that allowed them to distribute either vouchers for people to go to local markets where local markets were functioning, or for WFP to buy food close to the region of need. rice is a staple consumed in the Philippines, so WFP was looking at the major rice producers in the region, including Thailand and Vietnam, and shipping rice from there, transporting rice from there to meet the needs of people in the Philippines. Over the longer time horizon, the U.S. said it would also provide in-kind food aid from a pre-positioning site at Sri Lanka. But that food, while the typhoon, I think, struck in November, I believe, the U.S. Indicated that they would not be able to get that food to the Philippines until January. So in the case of the Philippines, what I'm illustrating is that you had a variety of responses that were timed to meet immediate, slightly longer, and then longer-term need in the country. And that's the kind of efficiencies or programming we should be looking for. But it's really the exception rather than the norm given the current state of how U.S. food aid functions.
Great, thank you. And Eric, this next question I think is directed towards you as well, and then we'll open up some more questions to our chefs too. But the listener asks, Eric, it sounds like some of the laws that govern food aid are outdated because of the evolving food production landscape. Is it still more efficient to ship half of the food aid overseas, or how can local and regional procurement be increased?
Yeah. Well, I do think that the problem, why haven't we seen the program change if we know that best practice in humanitarian assistance and also development would promote more local and regional procurement? So part of the issue to underline here is that there are some real interests in maintaining the status quo that need to be addressed. So the U.S., there are a number of carriers in the United States who rely on food aid for a big portion of their profits every year. And dealing with the U.S. flag vessel requirement has been difficult because of that special interest. Similarly, agriculture organizations have in the past looked at food aid as a significant benefit for their export orientation, and have sought to maintain the program because they see it as an important part of their business model. But if you really look at U.S. agriculture exports and U.S. agriculture production generally, we see that food aid is not significant. It's not an important component of the agriculture economy generally. But those special interests have also been pushing back against reform and making change more difficult. So what can we do? We can do more local and regional procurement than we have been if we're able to address these special interests and break the gridlock that we've seen, which is why we are asking for all your help. We wouldn't expect that we would be able to do 100%, nor would we want to go to a system where we're simply saying we should be 100% local and regional procurement. We think we can probably get to above 50%. In terms of what we're able to what USAID is able to efficiently purchase and distribute through local and regional procurement or through cash and voucher programs. That will vary on a year-to-year basis depending on the emergency needs, depending on local production levels. But what we are arguing and what we have always argued for is to make local and regional procurement and the distribution of cash or vouchers part of the toolbox for food aid. So we would maintain some portion of the food purchased from the United States, and some benefits would still accrue to U.S. agriculture and U.S. shipping interests. But that shouldn't be the determining factor in how we make decisions about how we respond and what tools we use.
Thank you, Eric. And so this issue seems to span more than just the policy arena, but really other aspects of the agriculture supply chain. As chefs, Emily and Evan, how are you advocating to consumers, or how are you gathering support from other chefs to push for better policies? And then, Eric, could more demand for local procurement of food aid also increase demand and support for small scale and family farmers in regions of the world?
Well, this is Emily. I think as chefs, we're all very we're all in our individual kitchens, but we're very well connected through social media and just the old-fashioned way with other chefs around the country. And I think if you just start talking about this with other chefs, it's kind of, I see it as almost a no-brainer. And when other chefs hear about it, they want to get involved. So it's really just starting out with individual conversations with chefs, and then it spirals and it gets, hopefully will get bigger and bigger. One of the things I've working with Oxfam that is so fabulous is there are so many people there that know these issues and are really bright. So you as a chef can contact them and say, hey, listen, this is something that I really believe in, but I really need some more ammunition, or I need some help contacting my local legislation and really getting the word out. Because the other thing I was really impressed with when I went to Washington, and even when I talked to people locally, my Congress people here in the San Francisco Bay Area, is really how receptive they are. I mean, it's very easy to get cynical about everything that's going on in Washington, but you see a lot of people there that are really dedicated and really want to do the right thing. And they want to hear from their constituents what we are all believing. And I think chefs have the ability to get that out through their own network with each other and also the people that they serve, because people trust us because we haven't abused that, that format or our platform.
Yeah.
Evan, do you want to add anything before I jump in?
Sure. Yeah. To add to that, I think, like I mentioned at the beginning, for this particular issue, a lot of the factors at play are kind of large-scale representations of small-scale issues that chefs deal with. So one of those being efficiency. David Garcelone, who's a chef at the Waldorf, was down in D.C. with us, and he put it very concisely and kind of practically, is that if you could, as a chef, increase your efficiency or increase the reach of your food by 30%, with no added cost, this would be something you wouldn't really even discuss, or you just go ahead and do it. That would be amazing. And then, as both Eric and Emily mentioned, and even Sarah touched on, chefs, for the most part, chefs involved in this sort of good food movement are very aware of supporting small-scale farmers and small-scale agriculture in their respective regions. And this is, I think, there's a significant portion of this issue that comes down to that in the areas that receive this food aid, whether it be simply, local regional procurement to support farmers in that area, or preventing kind of a long delayed arrival of foreign aid in a way that will end up undercutting the local agricultural recovery, which I think tends to happen with the inefficiencies of shipping from here. So I think when we can tie these issues, these global issues, connect them to something that affects us as chefs or consumers or local food or sustainable food advocates more viscerally, something that we can really wrap our heads around, that's when people get excited about supporting this issue on a global level.
Yeah, I'll just follow on that point, which is the connection between local producers and local consumers is one that I think people, particularly on this webinar, will relate to. There's been a big local food movement that has gained a lot of momentum over the last 5 or 8 years. And we think that it's important to continue to build that kind of support, not just domestically, I'm supportive of that, but globally as well. And local procurement, for example, we've been talking a lot about why it matters from the U.S. taxpayer perspective, but from the local food systems perspective, it's incredibly important, and connecting, building opportunities for small-scale food producers. One of the things I didn't mention at the outset, but I think many of you are aware of, is that a majority of the people who suffer from hunger live in rural areas and rely on agriculture for some portion of their livelihoods. And we certainly should be looking at ways that we can build their resilience and the sustainability of their farming activities, even in instances where we might need to be providing assistance through food aid. And so I think local procurement, those sorts of approaches to addressing hunger are really important, not just to address immediate need, but also to help people exit from need in the future.
Thank you all for your answers. And I think we just had time for one more, and I'd love to maybe follow up with you with some of these other ones that we weren't able to get to today. But as you may know, Food Tank listeners are always looking for ways to really make a change. And part of what we do at Food Tank is give people actions to take and bits of hope and success and innovation and creating a better food system or related to food aid today. So I just want to end with, as consumers and eaters, how can our listeners support either Oxfam's campaigns, or what other steps can we all take to help reform food aid to be more efficient or effective?
Well, if you're in New York, you can go to Egg, and if you're in California, you can go to one of Emily's many restaurants that she works with out there. So as local consumers, spend your money wisely. And there's something called Chefs Action Network, which is one of the organizations that Oxfam has worked with. And there are a number of chefs there who are active as social justice advocates on these issues, and certainly encourage all the Food Tank listeners out there to be engaged with that as well. From Oxfam's side, our work on food aid is part of our larger GROW campaign, where we look at a range of issues related to agriculture, food security, and climate change. So certainly becoming involved with Oxfam's GROW campaign can give you insights and ways forward in action, both on food aid, but also on a much broader set of activities that Oxfam cares about and that we recognize are absolutely critical issues to address to right the wrongs of hunger and injustice. So I would also encourage you to follow Oxfam's GROW campaign. And then finally, I think it's important to recognize that Oxfam, as I mentioned, has been working on food aid issues for a number of years, but we're not alone in this. Many other organizations care about this issue. American Jewish World Service, CARE, Save the Children, etc. So there are also opportunities to look beyond Oxfam to engage with this broader community of practitioners and advocates who care about food security issues, who care about small-scale agriculture, and want to see these things improved. So I think that there's a menu out there, but most critically, we have a moment over the coming next 3 months where a real push on food aid reform could make a huge difference in terms of getting the momentum for reform. And I would highlight one final thing, which is that next week, April 15th, the Senate will host a hearing, Senate Foreign Relations Committee will host a hearing on food aid, and that marks an important step. There's never been a hearing in the Senate on food aid, I don't think, in the Foreign Relations Committee, so that's a key moment, I think, where we will begin to see real attention brought to this issue. So for advocates out there, it's a critical moment to engage.
Great, thank you. And I'm sorry that we've run out of time, but thank you, Evan, Eric, and Emily for participating with us today. It was truly a pleasure. And thank you to all of our listeners for sending in their questions as well. I just want to let everyone know that our next webinar will be April 16th, the day after that hearing, and it'll be with Carrie Hammerschlag, and it'll be on food, water, and climate change. What you put on your plate matters. You can all register on foodtank.com. And thank you to everyone again, and have a great rest of your Wednesday.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.